The Hogsty presents It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and Rich Rogers. And now, here's your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogsty Network. We take a look at the dollars and cents, the goings-on, the media, and all of those interesting tidbits in the business world of the sports that we love and sometimes kind of like. I am joined by my compatriots here, Steve and Rich, for another episode. Rich, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Enjoying little vacation, little R&R, just coming back from the beach, so I'm ready.
All right. Steve, how you holding up?
Oh, I'm holding up just fine. Glad to be here another show. It's the dead of the off season still for the NFL. So we're at a little bit of a low side, and we're recording this on the day of the home run derby for the Major League Baseball All-Star Game festivities. So it's truly the dead of the year for sports, but fortunately there's tons of sports business stuff going on, which always makes me happy.
Yeah, I usually view the ESPYs as the low point in the sports calendar year.
Yeah, it's like the ESPYs, and then the ESPN does that. Who's the guy who died of cancer? Jimmy V. They do the Jimmy V fundraiser thing, which God bless him. We all want cancer to be cured, but when they do the all-day fundraiser thing, I just can't listen to it. At some point, I get tired of it.
And sorry, I can't do Wimbledon. I used to love tennis, but I'm waiting for football.
We only have a couple more weeks, until
Yes.
at least training camp. So at least we're gonna have some news, But fortunately,
Can't wait till the Hall of Fame game. Who would have thought you'd be looking forward to the Hall of Fame game?
Yeah, we had on the other show just this week on the Hawks side, we just had Rick Gosselin on from the Dallas Morning News. If you guys haven't listened to that yet, and we had him on there to talk about the Hall of Fame, and he unfortunately was fairly pessimistic about Joe Jacoby's Hall of Fame candidacy, which bummed me out.
Yeah, that's a travesty, but that's another show.
Yeah, it's a whole nother show. But I brought it up because I'm still bummed about it, quite frankly. So let's move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to do a full Hogsty Network show dedication to get Joe Jacoby in, right? We need a vertical integration for that when the push is needed.
Well, and that's a very good point, and we'll talk about that off the air, Chris. Good idea.
All right. Well, when we start using business terminology, it means we need to shift into our topic rundown for this episode. So the first one we're going to dive into is actually kind of a funny story that actually has a lot of interesting real-world implications, and that is the deferred contract issue through the lens of one Bobby Bonilla, who is still, I believe, every July 1st being paid out for a contract that buyout from a contract with the New York Mets way long ago. Steve, you want to give us a little bit of the financial rundowns?
Yeah. Now, let's give a little bit of background on Bobby Bonilla and what we're talking about here, because it's all very interesting. Bobby Bonilla was an outstanding baseball player about 20 years ago or more. Played for a whole bunch of teams, but is probably most well known for being with the Pittsburgh Pirates and the New York Mets. And he was probably, a top 10 hitter in his day. Now, the interesting part of it is that he signed a huge contract back then, a huge contract for back in the late 90s with the Mets, underperformed, retired, and the Mets still owed him $5.9 million. $5.9 million as part of the contract. Now, instead of just paying him the $5.9 million, what they did was Bonilla and the Mets agreed to a deferred payout of the $5.9 million, but the payout terms were just the most insane payout terms you've ever heard in your life. And the nutshell of it is that the Mets contractually agreed to pay him $1.19 million every July 1st between 2001 and 2035. In essence, they are funding Bobby Bonilla's retirement. And Bonilla has, the pension coming from Major League Baseball, but I don't know how the Mets in any fantasy thought that paying Bobby Bonilla that much money over the course of 35 years was somehow better than just biting the bullet and paying him $5.9 million up front. Never understand that. It's very interesting that they would contemplate doing it. There's a video on 538.com that talks all about it. It's very interesting. It's about 10 minutes long. And they go into how the Mets actually invested all that money in different things and different players, and actually came out sort of okay in terms of their usage of the $5.9 million. But gosh, they're paying Bonilla a lot of money. It's good to be Bobby Bonilla. What do you guys think?
Well, to pay him that amount of money, and I assume that after taxes, that might be about $600,000, $650,000.
Yeah, probably.
For until 2035, so another 17 years.
Yeah, he's only halfway through it.
That's insane, and I actually good on him. Literally, as you said, Steve, that's on top of his MLB retirement, and these aren't new. These deferred contracts are not new, but this one probably stands out and could be one that players could possibly use as leverage.
Yeah, and the total number, by the way, it's about $30 million is what is the amount of money that the Mets will end up paying him after all this nonsense. Because it was a sliding scale, I think, apparently. Now, how this relates to sports is how this relates to somebody besides Bobby Bonilla is that he's not nearly the only contract that's had this provision in it. Yeah, Derek Jeter apparently had a deferred compensation, and there have been others. Who's the crazy man who played for Boston who went in? It was right in the Boston Red Sox.
Manny Ramirez?
Thank you. Yeah, Manny Ramirez. The name was escaping me. Manny Ramirez got paid a big chunk of deferred money from the Dodgers. It's been done in the NBA. It's not done in football. That's what I find interesting.
Right. Yeah.
And that's actually, there's a lot of interesting angles to this, and I definitely recommend that video. And they do say the Mets actually were able to flip that savings into Mike Hampton,
right,
who they helped get them to the World Series that year, and then they traded Mike Hampton for a draft pick that became David Wright. So actually an interesting kind of way in which that panned out right for the Mets. They did not win the World Series. And the other funny part of this from a business angle was that the Mets' calculus at the time in terms of paying out that much was because they were in the thick of what was the Ponzi scheme guy?
Bernie Madoff.
So
yeah,
they were figuring 12% returns on their investment. So they thought they were going to be making money off Madoff in perpetuity. So that actually helped so it's really a fascinating story. But getting back to football, this seems to me to be a contract structure that could make a lot of sense for football players, especially considering the ongoing health risks, the shortness of careers, and the propensity for, football players that maybe play 3, 5, 7 years to be essentially broke by the time they get into their late 30s. I think it's actually a fascinating equity issue on NFL contracts.
Can I explain to you why the owners will never do it? Will you allow me to do that?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
It makes too much sense.
Well, the real reason is that basically all of Major League Baseball contracts and almost all of NBA contracts are fully guaranteed, where very few NFL contracts are guaranteed. And so the Mets are contractually obligated. They had to pay him the $5.9 million in some way, shape, or fashion. Well, if and they wanted to get rid of him. Make no mistake, the Mets back then wanted to get rid of Bobby Bonilla. He was a pain in the butt. He wasn't performing. They were happy to see him go. In the NFL, if they're happy, if they want to get rid of a player, they're just going to get rid of him, dump him. They'll wait till the dead cap money is at an acceptable level, and they just get rid of him. There's no need for the NFL to do any deferred contracts because they can just throw away 95% of the active NFL contracts. That's why it's not done in the NFL.
Yeah, the other thing is the NFL has a hard cap. So,
right,
the MLB and I mean, there is no salary cap in Major League Baseball, and the NBA has a relatively soft cap, so it makes more sense to do. With the NFL, I mean, and you mentioned it, Steve. There are a lot of teams with some dead money. I mean, the Redskins had some dead money. I mean, look at the David Bruton signing. He was signed to a 3-year deal, and he only lasted 5 games into the first year.
Right.
So that might be as close to some deferred compensation as you can get, because we'll have to either buy him out or pay him part of that dead cap for those 3 years.
Well, you make a very good point. I mean, the salary cap, the CBA doesn't really address this issue in terms of multi-year deferred compensation, in the collective bargaining agreement at all. And you're right in saying that, the NBA technically has a salary cap, but it's like, holding a piece of notebook paper in front of a Mack truck, in terms
Right.
of, the ease of breaching the cap. In baseball, I mean, there's a fine structure. If you go over a certain amount, you pay a fine, but that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to be Bobby Bonilla. I understand why the Mets would do it, and the reason why the math. If you know anything about finance, this seems absolutely crazy. Even if you do, even if you would discount it to present value, the money that they've paid, it still is just an insane amount of money. But the reason why the Mets agreed to it, and Chris mentioned the Bernie Madoff scandal. If for those of you who don't know in brief form, what Madoff was doing, Madoff was promising insanely high returns on his investment fund. Insanely high funds, but 95% of his so-called customers would just reinvest the phony returns right back into the fund. Now, none of it existed. There was no investment. He was just literally stealing the money. But because the Mets thought they had this guaranteed insanely high return from Madoff, they thought that they could actually make money on the money that they were saving, on the $5.9 million they were saving. And of course, when the Madoff thing blew up, they lost. It didn't work out for them anymore. But yeah, the long and the short of it was that Bobby Bonilla became David Wright, which is just hilarious. I think,
And
yeah.
And he made over, I think, $60 million just playing baseball, regardless of that
Right.
deferred money. So, he banked a lot in just his playing career. He played for a long time. He played for a bunch of teams. He's a 6-time All-Star, World Series champ. So, he made a living. 3 generations of Bonillas could, essentially be on easy street anyway, let alone collecting after taxes, $700,000 paycheck to do nothing. I do think it's interesting to, eventually, maybe it won't be in the next CBA, but between the health concerns, player safety, they're going to have to think of some ways in which they bring some equity to long-term player contracts if they want to save their sport. And I do wonder if you actually were able to get cap relief on deferred money, if you did it on the guaranteed, the signing bonuses. I think it, definitely under the structure it is now, it would never work. But I wonder if it's something that enters future collective bargaining agreements.
I mean, it's something that would be good for the players, and they ought to fight for. I hear you from that respect, but I just think the NFL owners are, you talk about greed. I mean, the story, all around Redskins land this week is that Kirk Cousins is greedy, which is just stupid, frankly. But, listen, I mean, the owners are all about money. The entire purpose of the 2011 lockout, the stated purpose of the 2011 lockout, was that the owners told the world that they wanted to increase their profit margin.
Well, let me ask you this though, and I get it. I don't subscribe to the Kirk Cousins being greedy issue, but I'll say this: if I'm an NFL owner and you have a sport, I mean, the real part about it is the NFL is a very violent sport. So
Right.
Hypothetically, if you're an owner, do you want to guarantee a player a 5-year deal, and you have an injury like a Teddy Bridgewater, or you have an injury like Junior Gillette with 2 popped Achilles? So from a business standpoint, from the owner's perspective, I do understand why there are very little guaranteed contracts, simply because do you want to pay a player that's not going to play for you? In the NBA, you very rarely have career-threatening injuries.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and that's a huge reason why Teddy Bridgewater is a perfect example. I mean, he was on his rookie deal.
Mm-hmm.
But rookie first round picks, rookie contracts are the only contracts that are guaranteed, believe it or not. I think the NFL, people have brought this up to us on Twitter on the Hog side too. I think it's highly unlikely for that exact reason that the NFL owners would ever want to guarantee any 5-year deal, because that can be over in the blink of an eye. Like the Gino Gillette thing was addressed because it was a non-football related injury and they can cut his salary basically.
Right.
But you'd hate to have that happen in a game, and I hate to use a real player. I don't wish an injury on a real player, but John Smith, the linebacker for the Redskins, has a 5-year deal, fully guaranteed, and then he goes out in the 8th game of the first year. Shoulder torn up, can't play again, and then they're stuck with it forever. NFL owners would never go for that. And the only way you get to deferred compensation, which is basically a funded retirement pension, the only way you get to that is guaranteed contracts. So I think it's highly unlikely in the NFL for that reason. Not to mention the owners are just greedy. Let's face it.
Yeah, and I guess partly the current popularity of the NFL and the economics as it is, I see that. But you start to project 5 to 10 years out where the popularity of the sport for a variety of reasons takes a pretty big dip and the economics and the situations change. I just think it's interesting to think about. I also, you guys are gonna make fun of me, but I've been watching Chris Samuels on the Real Housewives of Potomac. Has anyone been catching this?
I didn't know there was a show.
Oh yeah,
really?
There is, and his wife is one of the Real Housewives.
I thought he was living in Alabama. Is he? He's now back in D.C., huh?
Well, who knows? They have 5 houses, 2 in Potomac.
He's coaching in the Virginia area, I think.
Yeah, I knew he was a high school coach. I didn't know it was in Virginia. Wow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you just see and you just watch this woman spend his money. And I don't mean that from a gold digger standpoint. He's
somebody
complicit
cue up the
and
Kanye
men do
West
it
song.
too.
Yeah.
But it is crazy to think about how these players go through this money, and between that and the injuries, at some point there's going to be a reckoning.
Well, if you think one more quick point on the deferred contracts, I think one of the more famous ones is Allen Iverson. And Allen Iverson went broke, but he has that Reebok deal that he can get, I think, coming up in maybe the next 10 or so years. And he gets, I think, go ahead.
You know what Allen Iverson has that's really smart? It's not just the Reebok deal. Allen Iverson is the beneficiary of a trust that somebody set up for him when he was a very young player. And the corpus of the trust cannot be accessed until he hits some number, whatever the age is. Until he's an older
50.
guy. Yeah, something like that. And so it was in conjunction with that Reebok deal. It's not just a payout. The Reebok, some portion of the Reebok money goes into the trust. And so Iverson can go broke. He can waste it all on gambling and strippers like he has. But he's taken care of because somebody, whether it's agent, I don't know who it was, agent, family, Reebok, I don't know who it was. Somebody did. Somebody took care of him. If I was advising the player, any NFL player, that's the first thing I would do, man, is you got to get a trust set up.
Well, if you're not taught about money, if you've never had it and you weren't taught about money and you have people pulling on you, I mean, it's easy to, we seem to be pretty fiscally responsible guys, man, but you've got people pulling on you. Some people have never had anything. I don't know if you guys remember the Philip Buchanan story. He played for the Washington Redskins, and he spent a lot of his money on family, and he bought his mother a house. Mom couldn't afford to keep up the rent payments. She ended up suing him because she said he bought a house that he knew she couldn't afford. He wrote it in a book. It was a fascinating article. So it's something that you guys, you have a minute to check out.
Wow. I hadn't heard that story.
Yes.
All right. So we will transition into our next topic, which may be somewhat of a cautionary tale for football, and that is the world of boxing, another sport that rode high for generations in American consciousness and popularity, and then its violence and the toll it took on the athletes caught up with its popularity, perhaps. But we've seen, it's an interesting story now about the recent Pacquiao bout on pay cable, basic cable, ESPN. And is this actually a sign of how far boxing has fallen? Or is it actually a roadmap to boxing's path back to relevancy. Thoughts?
I actually think that the reason why boxing's popularity in this country has gone down over the past decade is because they've put way too much of it on pay-per-view. I'm personally a big boxing fan. I've always watched boxing since I was a little kid. I've watched boxing. I boxed a little bit in college. I love the sport of boxing, and I'm not any kind of great boxer myself, but I did do it. But I'm not willing to pay $100 to watch a fight. I'm just not willing to do that. Some people are, God bless you, but I actually think that while it's made a healthy profit for these boxers, it's hurt the sport because it's limited access. It's limited access to the sport to the common man. And ESPN puts this Pacquiao fight on, which, by the way, got gangbuster ratings. I mean, gangbuster ratings. And the fight itself was a very entertaining fight. But it got really good ratings irrespective of whether the fight was good. It was because it was a big name that we all could watch and not have to pay anything. I mean, you're paying your basic cable, but you don't have to pay $100. So I think this is exactly what the sport of boxing needs. And frankly, it may be what ESPN needs as well, given the problems with ESPN.
Yeah, I think the one thing with boxing, for me, is the one thing that irritates me is none of the fights happen when they're supposed to happen. Fighters fight either past their prime. The matchup should have happened 5 years ago. It's almost scripted. Like, there's going to be a rematch even a third time. So there doesn't seem to be any real, from what I've seen, any real bad blood between some of these fighters that actually they would be willing to put on a good fight like back in the day. But I think the Pacquiao issue is very interesting in that when it came on TV. I mean, you guys are old enough to remember Wild World of Sports,
right?
And Muhammad Ali and some of the big ticket draws would fight religiously on Wild World of Sports, and then every now and then you'd have a big closed circuit event. But I think there needs to be a mixture. But I think also a point that we haven't touched on is the popularity of MMA and how accessible MMA is for many people. So I think that has cut into. But I'm not a huge MMA fan, but I just think it's violent but it's very popular, and I think it's outranking boxing in some ways.
Well, and I think
it sounds like. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
No, go ahead.
It sounds like we're all in agreement here that this actually is a positive turn for boxing, and I would actually agree, Rich. When you think about I am a boxing fan as well. I find the entertainment value and the product of MMA so far inferior to boxing. But I think you're exactly right. Its accessibility on network TV, on Fox, on pay cable, etc., has meant that it could quickly eclipse the popularity of boxing, which totally choked itself on the pay-per-view model, which goes back to your point as well, Rich, in that meant that people held out for the right deal on multiple levels. There wasn't there wasn't about every quarter on network TV. There wasn't, Friday night fights to sort of, that needed to fill a card every 2 weeks. And so without that regularity of a schedule, the business model of pay-per-view, it meant that everyone could just sit around and wait until you got the right fight, the right pay-per-view package. It meant people were past their prime. It was names versus quality of sport. I think it's why they got here.
Yeah, I think MMA is, as a sport and as a business model, is sort of where boxing was in the 80s. Because you're exactly right, Rich. I mean, the reason I became a boxing fan as a kid was the Wild World of Sports. It was on every Sunday, and they would have title fights back then on Wild World of Sports. You just couldn't see Tyson, or Muhammad Ali or Larry Holmes, or you could see anything below that. And even some of those big names would have some lesser fights that they would show live on Wide World of Sports. You just couldn't see Hagler Hearns maybe on the Wide World of Sports, but you could see basically anything below that. And that's why I personally became a sport. Now, the popularity of MMA really came when Dana White started putting it on Fox, and it was on every Saturday night. Right. But they're getting to the point where the good MMA fights all end up on pay-per-view.
Yeah.
and I'm not enough. I'm not up on the names enough to know, who the names are. But like Ronda Rousey's last couple fights, where she got her teeth kicked in, those are all pay per view. And so I think they're going that same way as boxing was. But boxing with this Pacquiao thing is coming back, and ESPN is bringing it back. Also, because ESPN is desperate for income themselves, desperate for ratings.
Yeah, I think, and again, just to go back to the point, there are two things. I think boxing, and you mentioned this, Chris. Boxing, sometimes they just don't have the right fight. The planets are not aligned like they used to be. For this is the right fight. This is the right time. There's about 3 or 4 months worth of build up, and every now and then nowadays you get a fight that has that. But the other thing that I think boxing gets wrong with this pay-per-view is that boxing was also a social event, and that how many times do we gather over our friends' houses when these big fights come on, and everybody comes in, and we get wings, and we have beer, and a lot of times, even women watch it a lot. But I think boxing used to be just as much as a social event as it is an athletic event as well. So, and I think that's kind of missing as well.
Yeah, I think in essence, they're pricing themselves out of the competition. Like I did, for example, I did watch the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight. What was that, 2 years ago now?
Yeah.
And because it was boring to your average person. To me, it was an interesting fight, just because Mayweather is always interesting to watch. But I didn't watch it at home. I went and paid $20 at the local sports bar. Right. I'm just not willing to pay $100 in any circumstance for any hour of television. I'm just not, and I think I'm not nearly the only one who's in that circumstance.
Yeah.
No, usually, Steve, you and I are on the other sides of these how we watch and what we'll do, but I couldn't agree more. And, when you figure that the NFL ticket, either through DirecTV or now through the web, is only about $120, and that's literally every game of the entire season. You know, so no one's paying $100, an event for anything on television.
Well, you see, but they are though. It's how much money has Floyd Mayweather made? The Pacquiao fight, the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight had an unbelievable amount of buys. I think the three of us here are in agreement, but they are selling fights. But the nutshell of what has happened is, it's kind of like the LeVar Ball shoe deal. The LeVar Ball shoes cost a fortune, so they don't have to sell a lot to make a lot of money. And so the boxing, they're selling a ton of advertisements, and all those boxing sponsors, and then the people are paying $100, to watch an hour of boxing. They don't need to sell a ton of them. They don't need to have great ratings to make money.
Still 2 years ago, and who even knows? You're not even building a system of even knowing who the next boxer would be that you would consider paying for, right? There's no long tail of boxers because you can't follow them.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying from a business model standpoint, the sport was making money because of the model, but they weren't growing the sport because they were limiting access to the general public, to people like us, who would otherwise watch it.
Yeah, it seems penny smart, dollar foolish type of deal.
In the 90s, I used to subscribe to Showtime only for the boxing. I was willing to pay the whatever it was back then, $20 a month for Showtime, because about once a month they had a great fight on. Yeah. And I just don't. They don't have that anymore. It just doesn't exist.
Yep. I mean, and again, past their prime fighters. I mean, look no further than Bernard Hopkins. I mean, he got knocked out of the ring. The last time. I mean, Roy Jones, fought too long. About 10 years ago, I watched. Trinidad versus De La Hoya, that the fight that was 5 years too late. De
La Hoya embarrassed himself in that fight.
Yeah, I mean, you go back and look at fights that never happened, like Tyson and Razor Ruddock. I mean, if you look at, but then again, you have fights that come along. You look at Holyfield Tyson. I mean, that was a perfect storm, right time. Both Holyfield, I guess, was he in his prime? Well, he was old then. I don't
He was a little bit past.
Yeah, but it was still it was in the range. It was in the ballpark at least. Yeah.
Finally, somebody that wasn't scared of Mike Tyson.
But right time, left ear.
I guess I don't think that MMA is necessarily a better product than boxing. I don't think it's a better sport necessarily. There's people out there who love it. I'm not criticizing your love of MMA. My point is, I don't think it's necessarily more entertaining. I just think it's more accessible, and that's hence the rise in popularity. Whereas boxing completely shut itself off for a decade, MMA took its place.
Yeah.
And that's where we are.
Well, Steve, you gave us a perfect transition when you talked about the LeVar Ball shoe deal.
It was unintentional.
Because it is now time to check in with As the Ball Family Turns. This week's episode has meetings with Magic Johnson, freshman league flameouts, and the family drama coming to a Facebook channel near you. Lots going on in the Ball family, even at a relatively quiet time in the NBA schedule.
Well, first of all, we need a theme song for this segment every week. If somebody out there come up with a theme song for us, we can play it. Because I don't want to pay you for it. I just want it for free. But, no, what's interesting, yes, there's a LeVar Ball, a Ball family reality show that's coming on Facebook Live. I personally will not be watching it, but he has cashed in on his notoriety. But the interesting thing I think that happened in the Ball family is that there was an article on ESPN. This is Ramona Shelburne, who's based out of LA. He reported from the Lakers for a bunch of years. And in this column, it's dated July 7th, called Lonzo Ball and Magic Johnson will determine the Lakers' future. She says in there that Magic Johnson and Rob Pelinka, who's the Lakers GM, went to the Ball family home in Chino Hills and flat out said, okay, what's going on with you, LeVar, with all this nonsense? And LeVar told him, this is all an act. I'm not really like this. This is just me marketing my brand and my son. And I promise you that if you draft Lonzo, I'm not going to keep doing this. And I thought that was very interesting. It's sort of like the peek behind the curtain. It's what was the old movie, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. You peek behind the curtain and see the wizard is really actually this wizened old man who didn't have any powers at all. And that's kind of where we are with LeVar, is what we've been talking about for months on this show. This was an act, it's a marketing gimmick, and it worked for him. But according to LeVar, at least it's over in terms of Lonzo. Not for Melo and the other kid, LiAngelo.
Ah, there is the asterisk.
So what do y'all think?
I think the Lakers need to be careful here. The Lakers need to be mindful of their brand, and you don't want. And the other thing is, and with that, you don't want the LeVar Ball show to be a distraction from being able to recruit top free agents, because a lot of times free agents want to come to a place where they can have an opportunity to be in the spotlight. But how if you're an established free agent, and let's say you're LeBron James, how do the Lakers, if there's been talk of maybe LeBron James in LA, Lakers, and maybe Clippers, but if he goes to the Lakers or even Paul George, is there enough room for a LeBron James and a LeVar Ball with his other two sons coming down the pipe?
Well, most certainly not, right? I mean,
Right.
LeBron James, is not going to want to put up with, all the spotlight. All these players. I'm not a big LeBron James fan personally, so it's going to sound like I'm picking on him, and I don't really mean to be. But there's a lot of ego in the NBA in particular. LeBron James is a transcendent talent. He's got a huge amount of ego. I don't think that free agents are going to want to put up with LeVar Ball nonsense. But that's the whole point here, is that the reason why Magic Johnson was comfortable in drafting Lonzo is that LeVar looked him in the eye and said, I promise you this is just a marketing gimmick, and I'm not going to keep doing this. But you said it, Chris. I mean, he's got two other sons. He's got LiAngelo, who's 15, and then LaMelo, who's about to enter UCLA here in the fall. So, is he going to keep Is he going to keep it up for them and just kind of ignore Lonzo? What's going to happen? What do you think, Chris? Am I crazy?
No, I think you don't ink a deal to do a reality show on whatever medium or platform and then be boring. So, and by the way, I'm volunteering to be the official reviewer and watcher of the Ball family on Facebook if we need one.
You're gonna have to
think
be.
that'd be hysterical.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you got the other Suns. Also, if there's one franchise in the NBA that knows how to handle multiple big personalities, Hollywood, etc., it's the Lakers,
yeah,
right?
Of course.
So, Shaq, Kobe, Kareem, Magic. I mean, there's a history of being able to handle that.
Well,
So,
of course, Kareem was the anti-Hollywood figure, of course.
yeah, but he still had a ginormous ego to balance with other hugely talented players. So I just think it's maybe the only franchise with its history and its market that could probably handle it.
If we can bring this back around to the business aspect of this, we told you guys in the beginning, I think it was the very first episode, that what LeVar Ball was trying to do was a new business model for cashing in on the fame of his NBA son, and that he formed his own brand. He's selling his own brand. He's cutting the middleman out. He's not. Yes, he cost Lonzo several $1 million in a Nike contract for sure. But the back end of this is that if Lonzo becomes a star, he's going to make a whole lot more money in shoes, particularly being with the LA Lakers with their huge fan base, and so he knows that. But he also knows what you said, Rich, is it can't be the LeVar Ball show and expect to recruit LeBron James, Paul George, name your superstar. That just isn't going to work if the dad is overshadowing even the Lakers.
Right. Yeah. I think Magic Johnson strikes me as a very intelligent person, and if nothing else, an excellent businessman. And I don't think he's going to allow LeVar Ball to overrun the Lakers.
Well, and the other thing is, if there's one person in the world that has a bigger personality than LeVar Ball, it's Magic Johnson.
Right.
He's much more likable.
Yeah.
Than LeVar. But Magic Johnson, make no mistake, he's my favorite basketball player of all time. I'm a gigantic Laker fan.
Yeah.
Magic Johnson has an enormous ego.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Yeah, he does, and he's extremely charismatic. He's an enormous personality. He has a bigger personality than LeVar Ball. He just knows how to harness it in such a way that it makes people happy. It doesn't make people mad. And LeVar is still trying to tiptoe that line, about it.
All right, well, we are confident that as the Ball family turns, will provide us with more story topics as we proceed. Last one, who are we at It's Just Business to kick a man while he's down? Unless that man happens to play for the Dallas Cowboys, and doubly, especially if he happens to be the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. So, Dak Prescott, we got to show our homerism a little bit here. We try to stay neutral often, but sometimes it gets the best of us. Dak Prescott was recently busted by a memorabilia authenticator. I can't say that word.
Authenticator.
There you go. Thank you. For having machine-signed autographs. And I find this hysterical because, Dak Prescott has basically pooped and farted gold since he walked into the NFL. So I enjoy that he gets a little bit of grief coming his way. It's not career damaging, but it is funny. And it also is pretty interesting because it's the sports memorabilia business is one of the things that we've kind of tracked. And here's another example of the layers of fraud. Thoughts?
Yeah, well, autographs are dumb, fundamentally, right? I have some, autographs. I've stood in line to wait for, a few players to sign some stuff in my day. I'm not criticizing anybody for it. But fundamentally, all an autograph is a piece of ink on a piece of paper. It really shouldn't be, from a market standpoint, it really shouldn't be worth hundreds of dollars, But it is because people want it. And yes, I find it hilarious that this Dak Prescott got saddled with this. But it's really kind of a bigger problem, because we've heard all sorts of stories. That there's the article that Chris got this from talks about how politicians, have signing pins. I've heard rumors for years, that record companies will sit in rooms and sign glossies in the name of, their artists. there's a lot more fraud in this marketplace than anybody thinks. And I think Dak Prescott is not nearly alone in this if he's done this.
I mean, I agree with you. I think this is, as much as I want it to be more of a story, I think this is just a non-story. To me, it doesn't really matter. If the signature's authentic, then I don't care if a machine does it. If it's truly, with my job, I have a stamp. I have a rubber stamp. And I can't sign. I don't have time to sign all the papers that I need to sign, so I have a rubber stamp. Now, doesn't look as pretty as my initial signature, but this is really a non-story to me. Yeah, you like that. I like the fact that it's Eli. Excuse me. I was getting ready to say Eli Manning. You got caught up in.
Well, hey, both of them have been snarled and similar.
But it's Dak Prescott, so any negative press that can be thrown his way, I'm all for it. But this is silly.
Let me ask you this, Rich. You are a big Muhammad Ali fan, if I recall. I can't remember if you talked about it on the show or off, but I know you are. And I know you have Muhammad Ali memorabilia, right?
Yes, I do.
What do you have?
Yes, I have an authenticated Muhammad Ali pictograph of it's a collage of all these tiny little pictures of him amassed into one bigger picture of him, and I got it at an auction.
I knew it was something like that. I knew it was something like that. Now, let's pretend that Muhammad Ali, God rest his soul, is no longer with us. But let's pretend that it was proven that Muhammad Ali used an autograph machine to sign that thing you have. Would it change what you would have paid for it, and would it change how you feel about it?
No, because I'm going to tell you why, and it goes back to my original point. It looks real. It looks real. It doesn't look like a machine did it, or could have done it. But and that maybe that's to answer your question. It really doesn't matter to me. I'm more interested in the actual thing than the signature.
Okay, so and that's your personal feeling on it.
You're right,
For me
right.
personally, like I happen to be, as I'm staring at this thing, as I'm sitting recording this, I happen to be staring at my signed Charles Mann picture that's sitting over here across my desk. And Charles Mann signed that in front of me, so I know it's real. But I'm not sure I would be willing to pay as much money, because I think I stood in an autograph line at Fair Oaks Mall for that years ago. I'm not sure I would be willing to pay whatever it was I paid for that if that was a machine. For me personally, my feelings about the market is that if the public knew about the machine's signatures and knew how much is fraudulent, I think it would legitimately damage the market. It would legitimately damage the values of these pieces. And I think your view on it, which I respect, I think is probably a minority view. You don't care about it, and that's fine. But I think that's a minority perspective.
There's actually fascinating rules and levels of nerddom in the autograph hound culture, sports and otherwise. You go to Reddit or whatever and get lost in a lot of rat holes on this one. But there's a lot of rules where people have to see it signed in front of them. It has to be a black Sharpie, not a blue Sharpie. So it's the layers of involvement. There are definitely rules that segment out the real people from the fakes in terms of how they get them. And I can see that. You get a handshake, you get a signature, you get a little FaceTime. That to me brings a lot more value to the autograph than just possessing it.
So that's like the Charles Mann thing. That's why I have a good memory of it, is that I met Charles Mann. I got to chit-chat with him for 15 seconds, when I was like 20 years old. And that means a lot more to me than if I had personally just bought that for $10 on eBay.
But to that, you know what? I want to retract my previous statement a little bit, because I just thought of something. So you guys, I've told this before about how I wrote Bruce Allen a letter.
Yeah.
And he actually wrote me back. And it's a handwritten letter, and I have it. And I'm probably the only one in the area that likes Bruce Allen, because he actually wrote me a handwritten letter on Redskins letterhead. Now, if I found out that he didn't write that, I might cry, because
or maybe his secretary signed it on his behalf.
I really love that letter. That's like one of my it's really weird. I'm really giddy over that little piece of paper that he wrote me. But that goes back to the point. If I found out that some machine did it, and then I'd be a little pissed.
But all the same, so are you? Do you stand by your previous statement that if you found out your Muhammad Ali sign collage, for lack of a better term, was a machine, would you have paid whatever? I don't want to know what you paid for it, but would you have paid the same amount?
No, I wouldn't have.
Sign?
I wouldn't
okay.
have. Yeah, I wouldn't have. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, this issue, this. Oh, as Chris said, there are a lot of ways that you can authenticate, and people need to see it. And we haven't even touched on, and this could be a topic actually for another show. We haven't even touched on the market and with these college athletes at signing these jerseys and helmets and not getting a dime. And so that's another issue with this, that we could talk about at another show.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's bringing us to the close of another episode. Might be interesting to think about what other Dallas Cowboys we would like to see spend a couple days in the news cycle, having being embarrassed, not in your no harm to any other person.
Zeke Elliott does it to himself. We don't need to wish it on him. He's doing it to himself.
And it's a couple layers of extremes than a autograph signing scandal.
Between Zeke Elliott and Des Bryant, they've got enough of negative attention hounds on that team to last, a lifetime.
Yeah.
Well, may it bring them all the negativity in this kind of football season.
There you go.
All right, so that brings us to the end. We will see you back in 2 weeks' time. As you know, we do this show every 2 weeks, so we'll be hunting the sports and business pages to find stories to bring you. You can always contact us at The Hogsty and give us some show ideas, give us some feedback. We love a little chatter, a little interaction. Steve, I'm not going to ask you where people can find you because you're a man of mystery. But, Rich, where can they find you?
Okay, they can find me on Twitter at DiscoQue, DiscoQue.
And you can find me at ChrisLarry33. And we'd love to hear from you about ideas for the show, what you think, and get a little fan interaction if we actually have fans.
And if somebody out there wants to buy a fake Muhammad Ali autograph, talk to Rich.
Oh, yeah, you're right. For double what I paid it.
Exactly.
Paid for it.
Make an
All right,
offer.
guys.
It's for sale.
Yeah.
Later.
All right. Good night, everyone. See you next time.
Good night. Peace.